This past December, Netflix released their first adult-oriented interactive title to their streaming service in the form of an extended episode of their techno-dystopia show, Black Mirror. Entitled Bandersnatch, it's a story that will take roughly 90 minutes to reach one of its many conclusions while drawing from approximately 5 hours of total scenes. The unique draw in this case being the option for players to dictate choices for the main character and restart the narrative to explore all the possible endings. But what I think is being undersold in all the marketing is the fact that previous choices will have an effect on subsequent playthroughs, and in ways that massively change the outcome. So for that reason I specifically use the word playthrough and not viewing, because Bandersnatch, despite how it's being publicized as a TV show, is very much a video game. That element of things you choose to do in one reality affecting future options when you restart, that is something that is so unique to video games because it's only possible with hardware and software that is actively making a record of what choices you've already made. It's not something you can just slap into any old projector in a theater without a huge infrastructure overhaul. But even for the sake of argument, even if you had audience members vote for options on a keypad, you'd still need a system in place to actually process these choices. And in something like Bandersnatch's case, the appeal comes from revisiting every possible route, which is not something that every audience member wants to do, much less in one sitting. This type of experience is geared towards personal devices like laptops and phones, which is finally something that has a high enough adoption rate to be viable from the point of view of a company like Netflix. And that's the part that I think is so remarkable about Bandersnatch. It's not some groundbreaking step forward for narrative as a whole, or even Black Mirror. Like, I really did like it, it's not my favorite episode by any means. What it is, though, is an extremely impressive prototype for a slick and seamless user interface, because wow, that lack of noticeable load times is a game changer. More than anything though, it was the short and stylized recaps that truly impressed me, because I'm used to video games that force you to reread hours and hours of intro dialogue just to get back to the important choices. It's an experience that's designed to be fully explored, but it doesn't waste your time. Bandersnatch is going to have a lasting impact that will do two things. One, get the other big name streaming services off their asses to produce original interactive content, and two, tools like Twine, which is usually used to make video games but also happens to be the one used to make Bandersnatch, are going to blow up and get far more accessible for hobbyists. There's going to be an emerging indie scene for this sort of thing. Netflix is about to popularize the next big gimmick in moviegoing, much like what Avatar did for 3D. You might not think that 3D made a lasting impact on films themselves, but it sure made an impact on ticket prices, and that's the part that gets corporations all hot and bothered. And as part of Netflix's strategy, even prior to Bandersnatch, they've been targeting the demographic that loves to rewatch the same shows over and over on repeat. Interactive kids shows are about to explode.
But how do we find the puppies? Who do we ask for help when we don't know which way to go?
Older properties are even begging for an interactive adaptation. Netflix is about to tap into something other companies will be chasing after for years, which is something they've already demonstrated they can do. And the craziest part of this whole thing is that Disney did this way back in 2002. Imagine it's 1992. Now imagine you're Disney CEO Michael Eisner. Life is good. You're pretty rich. You still have hair. Even better, your company is currently riding high on the success of the renaissance that started 3 years ago with The Little Mermaid, continued with Beauty and the Beast, and you've just had another smash hit with Aladdin. The Little Mermaid has just released its TV series adaptation that same year, which premiered with an hour-long primetime TV special. The next logical step is to adapt Aladdin into a similar TV series, but instead of an hour-long primetime pilot, you get pitched to release the show's pilot as The Return of Jafar, and market it as a direct-to-home video sequel. Now, Disney has made several TV shows with their properties by this point. This is nothing new, but they've never marketed a full-fledged sequel tie-in before. On the plus side, skipping a theatrical release would cut the release schedule down by multiple years, not to mention the lower financial investment. On the other hand, your company has only just exited a dark period that was plagued by recycled animation and some major cinematic flops, so the risk of tarnishing Disney's renaissance is ever present, and it keeps you up at night. But since you're a risk taker, you take the plunge, and that's the story of how Disney's first ever direct-to-video release became the 14th highest selling VHS of all time. In the US, obviously, but you probably knew that. So what would you, Mr. Michael Eisner, choose to do next? Well, after this, the floodgates opened. Budget versions of hit Disney properties were getting direct-to-video movies left and right. Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, Cinderella, Tim and Peter, Leonard and Starch, Buzz Lightyear, everyone and their mom was getting a sequel. But this is a little bit deceptive, because for every bona fide original sequel, you would get far more sequels, which were nothing but 3 episodes of a soon-to-premiere TV show strung together with a loosely overarching narrative. Possibly the saddest case was Atlantis: Milo's Return, which is very clearly 3 episodes of a show that never, ever ended up getting made. The scope and the scale had to be shared evenly by 3 self-contained adventures without upsetting the status quo, so not a whole lot of character development. So yeah, it's kind of scummy, but you also can't deny that it's also quite clever, from the money side of things. What better way to gauge the audience interest in a TV pilot than by offsetting the costs through a neat and tidy DVD release guaranteed to rope in some clueless parents. Fast forward 10 years and we've arrived at 2002's release of Tarzan and Jane, a packaging of the first 3 episodes of The Legend of Tarzan's 2nd season. They were also the last 3 episodes of the 2nd season. And also the whole show. At the same time, they almost feel like they were meant to premiere much earlier, but ended up getting cut for whatever reason, with multiple recurring characters getting their introductions here. So in effect, these are nothing more than a collection of lost episodes told through flashbacks in an anniversary subplot. They are nothing special, and you probably didn't need me to tell you that. Jane's friends visit her from England. They search for diamonds in a volcano, and a childhood friend turns out to be a double agent. Don't go in with too many expectations. I probably would have watched the show if given the option back in the day, but like, I probably would have watched anything back then. Like, I was an idiot. So it's hardly worth much attention these days. Except, and here's where it all comes together, the special features. That's right, it's the 2000s, baby. The Millennium. VHS? More like very hard to use. Wham Bam, Thank You Ma'am DVD menus were the budget video game console of the early 2000s that everyone and their mom could play. Most of them weren't very good. Some of them barely even qualified as menus. But there were the odd gems that had their charm, and Tarzan and Jane delivered with the Tarzan Adventure Builder. You best believe this bad boy right here is the only reason I dropped $15 on an out-of-print DVD from a Barnes & Noble in Illinois, and I don't even own a DVD player. This video is sponsored by my mom and dad's house. I don't visit unless it's useful to me. I'm a bad son. Howdy, gamers. It's me, your boy, Professor Fettuccine Alfredo, coming at you live to explain why this adventure builder could have been a game changer. This is my monkey, Crank. We named him after the wrench. Imagine, for a minute, that you are Tarzan. You are swinging through the jungle, vine to vine, because you are its king. You are the leader of the jungle. But wait, your wife, she's fallen. She's in the mud. What do? You can't leave your wife, but off in the distance is smoke. And smoke means one thing in the jungle. And basically from this point on, you're playing as Tarzan, making A or B decisions to live out a choose-your-own-adventure using assets and art from the show. And Tantor is your narrator. Yeah, so this is all the possible routes that I have made into a map. None of this is fake. This is all from the game, and this took way too long to set up. But the best part of this entire experience is that Tarzan can straight up die. You can die in 11 unique ways. Not technically die, because it is G-rated, but if, being crushed under a log that is on fire does not count as a G-rated death, and I don't know what does. Tarzan dies from a spider bite. Tarzan goes to prison. Tarzan gets out of prison, but then gets caught and goes back to prison. Almost drowns, mauled by dogs. Tarzan gets a spider bite, doesn't die, but while trying to get the antidote, falls off the vine, gets concussed, and then dies. One of them, he gets tricked by a businessman and then ends up bringing unregulated capitalism to the jungle, wiping out half the forest. He is depressed, and... wait.
Same.
And here's the highlight to the whole thing. Jane is kidnapped by the High Priestess Queen Law of the blood cult of the abandoned city of Opar in the hopes of seducing Tarzan with the help of her leopard men, a race of disfigured humanoid leopards which are a result of extreme sexual dimorphism caused by a combination of excessive inbreeding, crossbreeding with apes, and the selective culling of offspring. This is Disney canon. So like overall, I think even though this is a little rough around the edges and maybe like a tad sluggish in the loading times department, it's the fact that something this intricate and involved was on a DVD, like bonus features selection, and nobody's heard of it. Like nobody's seen it ever. This is a proof of concept for interactive media on the same technical and logistical level as Bandersnatch, but nearly 17 years ago, back when dial-up internet was still the norm. DVD players were already in the living rooms of millions of consumers by this point, and even if a household didn't own a dedicated DVD player, they just as easily could have owned a compatible PS2, aka the best-selling console of all time. And yeah, a DVD remote is going to be clunkier than a dedicated game controller, but not only is it far simpler for non-gamer adults to understand, a story built around pausing the action and contemplating decisions isn't going to require snappy reaction time. Basically, the tech could handle interactive movies, enough people owned the tech, and the tech was intuitive enough for the average viewer to enjoy. And consider this. Back then, Disney was perhaps the one company with enough brand recognition, deep enough pockets, and a back catalog so extensive that almost no additional animation would need to be produced to pull this off. And in almost the exact same way today, you have Netflix, a company whose service is viewable on devices that vast portions of the population use every day. And they possess a seemingly perpetual supply of original content on top of some lucrative licensing deals with large production studios. And the behind-the-scenes details for Bandersnatch make it clear Netflix has developed an in-house toolkit to make interactive stories easier to create in the future. So just imagine them approaching an animation studio to pitch them an interactive kids show. But now, instead of needing to contract a game development team to throw some recycled animation into a menu system and jump through all the technical and legal hurdles to get it published on one of the big three consoles, why not instead send Netflix your episodes and have their teams integrate it into an in-house toolkit and UI specifically designed for this sort of thing? So either Netflix is playing some 5D chess here, or Disney was just asleep at the wheel back then. Or why not both? Oh, I didn't see you come in.
Howdy, my name is Dr. Alfredo Fettuccini. Have you or a loved one ever made an inflammatory YouTube video making an uncharitable assertion about the behind-the-scenes production of a piece of media? Don't worry, this is a no-judgment zone. Trust me, we've all been there. And remember, the first and the hardest step is admitting you have a problem, and I'm here to help with the rest. Remember, media isn't made in a vacuum. It's often the collaborative work of dozens or even hundreds of people to put a product onto store shelves. Sometimes, though, the media you consume is not perfect. You see, masterpieces like The Boss Baby, Back in Business, Season 1, Episode 4, Into the Belly of the House of the Den of the Nest of the Cats, they just don't get made every other day. So yeah, media can be broken, it can be sloppy, it can even be unfinished, but there's some things you gotta keep in mind. The quick fixes you think might take at most 2 hours to implement probably aren't as doable as you think they are. You have production schedules, you have budget cuts, sometimes you even have freak accidents. All things that contribute to the final product, but they're not obvious after the fact. Like, unless you've worked in industry, you don't really have a technical or logistical sense of scale for these projects and what it takes to get them out on store shelves. The point is, unless you actually know what happened behind the scenes, you can make, at best, a highly educated guess at why things ended up the way they did, but no more than that. See, it's easy to buy a $100 USB microphone. It is easy to pump out rant videos about lazy QA in video games or cartoon mistakes in the in-betweens of cells. It's not productive. You're not helping anyone. What is productive, on the other hand, is developing a well-rounded understanding of the technical and logistical elements that go into producing a commercial product, and why the perceived quality of that product is inextricably linked to the logistical and technical hurdles, for better or for worse. And in some cases, it'll help you understand why what seems like a no-brainer, genius idea probably didn't make it past the planning stages. To make a long story short, either do your research, or shut the fuck up.
From my outsider perspective, a series of interactive cartoons derived from Disney's enormous library of existing TV shows sure seems like a no-brainer. But ultimately, I don't know how hard it is to make a DVD game. I barely even know how they work. As much as I do have a technical background when it comes to stuff like bit rates, digital storage, and software, there's a whole infrastructure to publishing DVDs and their menus that I just have absolutely no context for. And it is quickly becoming a lost art. And you might laugh at that, sure. But am I wrong? Menu design requires the skill set of a graphic designer, an animator, and a video editor all in one with some software knowledge sprinkled on top, and that is nothing to scoff at. But because it's such a niche part of movie production that is largely viewed as an afterthought that comes months after a movie has already left theaters, there's barely any documentation written about how to actually do a job like this. And this is during a period when they're still being produced and sold. Imagine like 10 years from now when they're like actually defunct, like how hard it's going to be to get info about this sort of thing. You can't exactly walk into your local public library and grab a copy of, DVD menus for dummies. So after hours of research, I did the only reasonable thing that I had left at my disposal. I gave up. The first was Lyndon DeCarmo, a software engineer at Oak Technology between 1996 and 1998, who was responsible for 17 patents relating to DVD playback and navigation. The second was Joe Walker, a motion graphics artist responsible for the design and authoring of DVD menus as part of a two-person third-party team. I was able to track them down thanks to some great articles they wrote on the subject of DVD menus, and they really helped to clarify some of the logistical and technical details that I was fuzzy on, so that was really helpful. In summary, my mistake was conflating the term possible with reasonable to do. You're gonna hate me for this, let's talk some communication theory. Lyndon DeCarmo's article provided a lot of insight into the way DVD as a data format actually works, and even though it's from 1997, it's at such a fundamental level that it's still applicable to DVDs as a whole. Something that was entirely new to me, however, was the distinction between DVD-ROM and DVD video, or in other terms, the distinction between physical data formats and logical data formats. Imagine a book full of blank pages. It's a cover, it's full of pages, they're empty. That is the physical data format. It's the thing that you can literally hold in your hands. It's physical, it's tangible, you can see it. But there are lots of different ways to write in a book. You could write with different font sizes. You could print on only one side of a page. You could print in a different language, or even in Braille. In essence, a logical data format, it's the style, it's the formatting guidelines to writing words in your book that you stick to and that you follow. But you never ever mix and match different logical formats within the same book. You don't just switch from Times New Roman to Magenta Comic Sans halfway through chapter 3. So let's take this analogy and apply it to DVDs. Now, instead of the blank pages of a book, you have a thin, disc-shaped piece of plastic. And on this piece of plastic are microscopic bumps etched into it into a spiral pattern. Now these bumps, they represent ones and zeros. But it's safe to say that if you actually want your DVD player to be able to read these ones and zeros to make those pictures, make those audio files, you need something that is, fast, and you need something that is precise. And that's going to be a laser. And this, at its core, is how any optical disc technology works. CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray, they all function using the same basic setup. Now they do have differences in bit rates, laser type, and storage capacity, but you get the gist of it, it's the same sort of thing. The first to hit the market, and by far the most prevalent form of DVD, is the DVD-ROM, which you might recognize as the acronym for read-only memory, which basically implies that whatever is stored on the disc in the factory is set in stone. You can't change it, you can't add to it, you can only view what's on it. There are other specialized variants like DVD-R, DVD-RW, and subcategories with more storage like dual-layer and double-sided DVDs, but for this video's purposes, they're largely irrelevant and you shouldn't worry about them unless you really like being confused. If you're buying a movie or video game from a retailer, the format you're buying is going to be DVD-ROM, and that is what we're focusing on. Here's a quick example. A PS2 game can be physically written to a DVD-ROM, but it can only be played with a PS2, because a PS2 is the only hardware that will recognize its logical format. So even though you could physically fit the disc into a DVD player, this would pretty much be equivalent to giving a non-Braille book to a blind person. It's definitely a book that they can hold in their hands, but they sure don't know how to read it. A DVD video can be physically written to a DVD-ROM, but it can be played by both a DVD player and a PS2 because the logical format is designed to be recognized by both pieces of hardware. See, what Lyndon's article explains is what DVD video as a logical format does is more than just outline a specific way to encode audio-visual clips onto a disc. The critical role it plays is providing a hardware-independent framework to create a navigation system, i.e. DVD video provides built-in support to make DVD menus that adapt to whatever hardware you're using. That's why you can watch Shrek 2 on a Samsung player, a Panasonic player, Windows 95, a PS2, whatever you want. It's a way to structure data that is built into the medium, and that's obscenely clever, just not really versatile, and kinda awful to develop for. Joe Walker was able to shed some light on the specifics of the DVD authoring process, which helped give me a sense of the scale of a typical project. Joe worked as part of a two-man team with one author and one designer, but he tells me that these sort of third-party groups vanished pretty quickly when film companies started to offload work into in-house creative teams. Budgets for a single production were upwards of $30,000 and would usually take about a single week to produce a one-disc product. The menu structure and requirements were often provided by the client, and the artwork was provided by the package designers, but the authoring team was allowed to get creative within the confines of that outline. He told me that DVD menus were never really a top priority for the client, and the goal was always to just get the product on the shelf, error-free, just get it out there. Joe's response when I asked him specifically about DVD games was pretty damning, and I quote here, "Games were a nightmare. The authoring environment is very generic and black and white, click here, go here, etc., so the setup for a game was huge for very simple setups. We created one game of memory on the Legend of Zelda animated series and the menu count was enormous. We steered clear after that project." Kind of throws a whole wrench in my big master plan there. Not only was the production timeline not suited to an intricate bonus feature like an interactive story, but the development tools available at the time were just straight up unmanageable for a game of any scope. But clearly, someone managed to do it. How do you explain an anomaly like this Tarzan DVD? I personally think it was thrown together by a team that was bored, ahead of schedule, and under budget. But, and if you take anything from this video, please let it be this, Without an employee to ask directly, we can't 100% know for sure. For all I know, maybe Disney higher-ups were floating this idea around, but in the end decided against it. They did approve a Scene It trivia game after all, but a third-party company would have handled that, so it's not really the same thing. Maybe they missed out on something big, but then again, they're one of, what, like 3 remaining companies left in the world today, so I really doubt they're that broken up about it. Now, just because Disney never went all in on the concept doesn't mean nobody else tried. The Abominable Snowman is a DVD exclusive release from 2006 produced by Choose Your Own Adventure, which is a brand of books, FYI, and not just a colloquial term. It was planned to be part of a series and even had a relatively famous cast, but I have serious doubts this kind of thing could take off without existing brand recognition on the level of Disney's IPs. And at that point, it was probably too late anyway. Netflix began to offer streaming in 2007, which just about signaled the beginning of the decline of physical media. A decline which we're still in the middle of, mind you, but a decline nonetheless. The sales figures don't lie. After peaking in around 2013, Blu-ray sales are continually shrinking, DVD releases often don't get any special features, and occasionally films go straight from theaters to streaming now. Some kids are growing up in houses without commercials, TV channels, and honestly, Blu-ray players are likely the next to go. Games are probably going to be the last to disappear from store shelves due to their inherently massive file sizes, but plenty of indie games are exclusively digital these days, and even big budget titles require the player to be constantly online. DVDs were always going to be a stepping stone in the evolution of media, and it would have required a lot of foresight and luck to capitalize on the short window that it dominated. But now the technology has come full circle and is more personalized and streamlined than ever. Netflix could do some great things with this, and I'm excited to see what that ends up being.
Into the belly of the house of the den of the nest of the cats, they just don't get made every other day. That was pretty good.
You said house of the den, but it's den of the house.
No one's gonna fucking... If someone calls me out, they've earned it. I'll take the fucking video down.